Hello friends, today I'm going to talk about the movie On the Western Front Without Change, a bloody meat grinder that grinds the lost generation into existential mincemeat. The film opens with a view of a pre-dawn forest in Germany in 1917. The view switches to a field strewn with bodies, machine guns blazing, bullets hammering into the ground, German soldiers in the trenches preparing to attack, climbing up ladders under fire. Some fall dead but others continue the fight. In the next scene the survivors sort through the pile of bodies. The dead they take off their clothes covered in blood and sent them to the laundry to be washed and dried, and then they get the clean clothes back to the front. They'll serve again. The main character young Paul goes on a bike ride to graduation. His classmates volunteer for the front but his father won't sign his permission. The lad has to forge a signature not to be torn from his classmates. The volunteers listen to a rousing speech from the headmaster who calls them the pride of the nation. He is sure that in a few weeks they will enter Paris. The boys greet the phrase with shouts of joy. Soon the volunteers receive their uniforms. Paul cannot hide his joy but notices a tag with someone else's name on it. The officer tears it off saying that the previous owner's uniform was too small. A lot of tags signifying those killed at the front lie under the table. And here the recruits march to war in joyful lines, impatience and anticipation on their faces. The action moves to the north of France. The lieutenant instructs Paul's squad right in the back of the truck. The youths joyfully chant "Welcome to Paris." A medic stops the truck. They have to transfer the wounded and it means they will go on foot. They have not managed to get to the trenches as explosions sound and gas cannon sounds. Paul helps his comrade to put on a gas mask, but does not have time to take it off. That does not escape the attention of the commander. He orders them not to take it off before lights out. On arrival at the position of the rain, having removed his gas mask, Paul commander orders the arrived to scoop out of the trench water. The hero gets acquainted with Kaczynski, who teaches warm the frozen hands in his pants. Scooping water with bowlers, the classmates say it's not how they imagined the war. Night watch, Paul leads a scoop. Friends discuss how to kill the first French. Optimism hasn't yet weathered out of them. Hearing noises, they don't fall to their sights, but it's rats gnawing on pipes. Suddenly a return shot lands in Paul's head and he falls down, but the bullet tangentially hits his helmet. A veteran who approaches advises them not to stand and to change position after every shot. And so the boys do. Later the shelling starts. The boys are told to take cover in the bunker. The schoolmate has a hysteric fit with the roar of the explosion. The veterans say that the artillery has moved forward a bit more. The French attack. Another recruit loses his nerve and wants to leave, ignoring the order of his commander. He barely makes it out of the opening when he is torn to pieces. The near explosion causes the bunker supports to sag. The commander calls on them to leave the room, but not everyone has time to do it. Paul collects the tokens of the dead and steps on his glasses in the dirt, the same as those of his classmate. His body lies nearby. The hero cannot hold back tears until a shout brings him to his senses and he returns to collecting tokens. Later the blood-stained tokens are sorted at headquarters, making lists of the dead. With the list the official goes to the head of the Truce Commission, Erzberger, a man capable of quarreling even the Avengers. He has to report casualties to headquarters. In occupied France, Paul skates in a truck across the snowy expanse. Getting off in a field, he and Kaczynski walk to the lonely farm at the edge of the field where the older comrade climbs the fence. Voices and barking dogs are heard. The German is noticed. Kaczynski runs out with a goose under his arm and rushes like a former. Paul runs after them, while the landlord shoots a double-barreled shot. The soldiers return and have a feast, enjoying the fresh meat. Later they see passing peasant women. One of them, Franz, runs to meet them and volunteers to accompany the girls. Kaczynski receives a letter from his wife when the post arrives and Paul reads it aloud to him. He has a son but he died. During the night Franz comes back from Don Juan's adventures. Paul tells them that in the morning they will go searching for the missing battalion. While an Erzberger is moving to the front, Kaczynski's squad scans the forest. They pass a mortar crater and see bodies hanging from a tree. They go to the gas attack of the railway station. While they are searching the depot, Kropp discovers a poster with a woman. Powell finds in a corner room dozens of dead, the missing battalion of recruits from yesterday's school who had taken off their gas masks too early. The general is informed that the French are preparing an attack. The commander himself is against peace and is ready to fight to the last German. But fresh troops will come soon, so he orders a preemptive strike. Meanwhile Erzberger goes to Kampen for the negotiations of an armistice. He rehearsing his speech in the compartment. When the train stopped, Kaczynski's detachment was ordered to assemble in the middle of the night. They were sent to the front line. A convoy of trucks cutting through the night with their headlights stole along the road. The drivers stopped their headlights on the way to the front line to avoid attract attention. The last kilometers the soldiers walked in single file. The front line met them with the earth stirred by the explosions and cold torn wisps of mist. While they were waiting for attack, they sat down with their sights with a heavy heart. The French invite the Erzberger delegation to negotiate with Marshal Foch. He receives the Germans but wants them to ask for an armistice because they need it more. When Erzberger asks, the marshal hands him a folder with a document that sets out the terms of an armistice, to be unconditionally accepted without discussion. The Germans have 3 days. During this time the fighting will continue. If Erzberger wants to stop the bloodshed he can sign the document now. The front comes with a command and the soldiers one by one. They get out of the trenches and run towards the enemy straight into the oncoming fire, falling in the mud and puddles. In front of Paul's eyes, an explosion kills the sergeant running ahead. The machine guns bring down the Krauts, but the attack does not choke. Some lucky men manage to get close enough, including Paul. He throws a grenade into a trench and runs to finish off the enemy. The comrades that broke through clean the trenches, throwing grenades. In general, they do everything they are supposed to. The hero has to hammer, the attacker has to beat up a young Frenchman with a saber spade. Clearing the territory, the heroes never miss an opportunity to refresh themselves with trophy supplies. Suddenly the ground begins to shake, scaring away even the fat rats, and the Germans hold the fortifications and peer into the smoke from which the miracle of scientific and technological progress appears. The first tanks, machine gun fire by steel monsters, are inexorable. The tracks devour meter after meter, bringing inexorable vengeance. Retaliatory fire of the tank cannons forces the Germans to lie down in a blind defense. Some of the personnel flee away. Tanks reach the trenches and move over them, crushing and shooting the enemy's foot force as they pass through. Paul's squad moves after them. Splitting up in the confusion, they manage first to immobilize a tank with one grenade and then shove another into the machine gun nest. Following the vehicles to the trenches, the flamethrowers come up and burn out the trenched Germans. The squad opens fire on them but is soon forced to retreat. Paul runs back when he is thrown back by the blast. Stunned, he looks at what is happening around him and sees the surrendering crop being burned alive by the French. At this time, the Erzberger delegation discusses terms of an armistice resembling a full surrender of Germany. Though things at the front are bad enough, so there is not much choice, Erzberger tells the adjutant to send a copy of the demand to the government to get its agreement. Kaczynski gets to the trench and shoots a machine gun. He manages to hit one flamethrower when the sergeant tells him to go back with the guns and ammo. Paul runs across the field with the other soldiers. As enemy biplanes come over them spraying lead, he falls into a huge crater and dies at the bottom with a knife in his hand. The hero sees a Frenchman aiming for but the explosion throws him into the same pit. Paul runs up to him. They lay side by side, one without strength, the other choking with blood. Unable to listen to the dying cries, Paul crawls away and picks up his helmet on a stick. It is instantly knocked down by the shot. The young man, having had enough breath, tries to help the wounded man by cutting his overcoat and treating the wound, but all his pains are useless. The Frenchman dies in his arms. In his pocket, Paul finds a photo of the dead man's family, which adds to his guilt. He takes his papers so he can find his wife one day and tell her that he is responsible for her husband's death. The Erzberger receives an answer from the government. He is told to make peace despite the harsh conditions. Paul then gets out of the battlefield and marches through the soldiers rejoicing. They are celebrating the end of the war, but the hero has no time for jubilation. He goes to the infirmary where he looks for his squad. He finds one wounded in the leg and comforts him. He gives him a woman's hanky, a trophy of Franz the trapper who died retreating in the kitchen. Paul finds Kaczynski, who argues with the cook at the food counter. They bring food to his wounded comrade, but he takes advantage of the moment and stabs himself in the neck with a fork. The friends clamp the wound and call the doctor, but the comrade dies in their arms, not wishing to remain disabled after the wound. Left alone with Kaczynski, Paul tells him that his parents were against his participation in the war. He discusses how to go on living with what they have suffered, but Kaczynski is not in a philosophical mood. The French military top brass and the Erzberger delegation gather in Marshal Foch's carriage. Foch refuses to compromise despite his opponent's exhortations. Erzberger has no choice but to sign a document agreeing to all demands, an armistice to take effect at 11/11 of the 11th day of the 11th month, and while the soldiers are rejoicing, the German general is in deep moral discomfort considering this a personal defeat. He orders the recruits to gather in the morning. In the yard at dawn on November 11th, Kaczynski looks through the broken glass. He listens to the silence he is used to during his service, no shooting or rumbling. Kaczynski goes to get food with Paul, discussing plans for Christmas on the way. Getting to the farm, Kaczynski drops Paul off. It is his turn to steal. The young man climbs into the barn, shoveling eggs in his pockets. He sees the boy, son of the owner, in the doorway, who locks the door from outside. Kicking the door, Paul runs away while the farmer unsuccessfully shoots after him. The stolen eggs broke in the process of running away. The soldiers fill a bowl with slurry leaking from their pockets, which they immediately drink raw. Having gone to the bathroom, Kaczynski is enjoying the silence when suddenly he hears a click from behind. It is the son of the robbed farmer with his father's gun. Paul hears gunshots. Paul goes to look for his comrade. He is alive but shot in the stomach. Paul drags Kaczynski back to let the medics patch him up, but it's a long way. They are overtaken by a truck full of. The doctor examines the wound and tells Paul the bad news. He tried in vain and his friend is dead. The hero doesn't want to believe it and tries to wake up his last comrade in arms while he is suffering the loss of his friend. The general gathers recruits in front of his residence. He orders to repel the French position before the armistice takes effect. Some of them shout that they are not going to fight anymore. They are immediately put up against the wall and shot according to the laws of war. The rest obediently march on until 11 o'clock, 15 minutes left, when a battalion of Germans bayonets the French in the trenches. Rejoice at the end of the war, and are ready to drink to mark the occasion. In the morning fog, the Germans creep quietly towards the fortifications. Their war cry is in the air and the French prepare to defend. Machine gun fire mows all around Paul. He hides behind a horse carcass where a grenade lands and the hero gives it back to the sender. The fight goes on. Paul kills some men, saving the life of a green novice as he was recently. They nearly drown him in the mud, but he manages to escape. The fighting men fall down the stairs into a dugout where Paul gets stabbed from behind. He falls on his knees trying to breathe. Blood stains his chest. An order to end the fight comes up. Armistice. Paul gets up with the last of his strength and walks towards the light to the exit of the bunker. He climbs carefully up the stairs and sees the wind blowing the ashes into the sky. A poster hung by Kropp not so long ago comes into view. When it hits 11, the Germans and the French disperse in different directions, carrying away their wounded. The sergeant orders the young man rescued by Paul to collect the tokens of the dead. One of them becomes Paul's token. The film ends with an informative note that in 4 years of warfare, the line of contact on the Western Front has hardly moved, even though more than 3 million people have died there. Thank you for watching.